Hello, friends. We wanted to let you know that next week on Sunday, November 1st at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, we will be doing our Halloween episode live for all of you on twitch.tv/Vie Cosplay. We found that there are a lot of visual elements to our Halloween episode, and we thought it would be fun to hang out with all of you live on our Twitch. So again, that episode is on Sunday, November 1st at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on twitch.tv/Vie Cosplay. See you soon.
Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Ashlyn.
I'm Al.
We are Vie Cosplay.
And this is Shit Cosplayers Say. And we actually finally made some cosplay progress.
Yay! Baby steps.
A couple weekends ago, we did our first casual chat on Twitch, Shit Cosplayers Chat. And during this, we ended up creating a motivational train of fellow cosplayers to kind of work on that accountability of not getting things done during this off season of cosplay.
So every 2 weeks, we are going to post progress and then goals for the next 2-week period. So our last update would have been on the 11th. And our next one after this recording will be, I believe the day this episode comes out, on the 25th.
Yes, it should be.
So I actually had to clean out my old sewing room from my old house was my goal for our accountability train. And I ended up moving 2 truckfuls, like can't even see out the back window of my SUV, from point A to point B. And currently the only thing that's left in the old sewing room is a very minimal amount of items hanging on the wall for sound dampening so I can record this episode. So yeah, that's really exciting. I tried to order my cabinets for the sewing room, but of course you can't order them online for whatever reason. And I got a hold of them on their website and social media, and one of them was completely useless, and the other one, they started talking to me, but then never responded. So I'm either going to have to call or physically go into a store, or just give up and order from somewhere else, which kind of disappoints me, because I've had the whole room planned around these particular cabinets for quite a while now. But I did order some items for a cosplay shoot I plan on doing later, like early winter, so that should be fun. I bought a dress and a wig. So that'll be entertaining to share with everyone later.
Yes, that'll be a good time. We're also currently trying to book some out-of-con shoots to update some of our stuff right now. I cut a triangle out. That's how far I've gotten so far. And I washed my fabric, which came in the wrong color.
Well, you know.
So that's fun. Yeah, I now have 5 different shades of purple available to me, none of which are either enough or the right shade of purple for Hinoto. But
you're so picky.
I'm just kind of at this point, I'm like, I don't care anymore. I'm using what I have because this is getting stupid.
Well, and it's really pretty.
It is. So it ended up being a shade too light, but it has kind of this iridescent undertone in it that's really neat. So I think I'm going to use it anyway because now I have 10 yards of it and it's not quite the color that I thought it was going to be, but hey, what can you do?
Now, did you end up ordering the same satin that we used for Princess Lady?
Yes, this is the angel skin satin from Textile Discount Outlet.
Good deal. I love that satin.
It's very nice satin for a very good price, which is why I was like, I'm going to give my money to Textile Discount Outlet. This looks like it's going to be about the right shade of purple I need, and then it wasn't quite right. But at this point, I'm like, I can't buy more fabric. So I'm just going to roll with it because in the end, it's my costume. And if I take it to a competition and a judge has an issue with it, well, that's their problem, not mine. So Like, sorry, but Hinoto has about 10 to 12 different color variations depending on the artwork that you're looking at, so I think I can get away with it.
Well, that's what happens when you have 5 separate artists on your creative team.
Well, and Clamp loves to do a lot of different art book renditions, but you'll also notice that there's even discrepancies between like cells in the anime and the movie as far as like what color certain things are. So at this point, I'm like, I'm just going to do a lot of different shades of purple with the red accents because otherwise she's really kind of flat. If you go directly with the source material, it's very color blocked and really flat. So I'm hoping that maybe if I use some of these variations, that'll help her be more visually interesting and not just a 30 plus yard sea of fabric, because that's about where we're going to be at when she's done.
Well, you know.
Yeah, no, she'll be at least 30 yards of fabric when she's done. So.
Well, and I know that that particular satin has a very like pretty visual texture, which is very drastically different from the red, which I'm assuming that you're going to use, which is the same red used for Harley.
I will be using it minimally now because the front bow will now probably be one of the shades of purple rather than the dark red, given that now the undertoned purple is significantly lighter than what I originally intended. But as far as for like the small red accents on the sleeves, yes, I'll probably be making all of that out of Harley's, which is yet another visual texture. And then the sanded satin has a different visual texture from both of those.
Yes, I do love me some sanded satin.
And then the purple that I have from Barrel also has a slightly different visual texture from Barrel 1, which I may use
absolutely.
For the, I don't know what you want to call them, but the scrolls that she has attached to her.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's another slight variation on the purple. And then I still plan on doing the corset style cincher from the tarot card art book, but probably in the eggplant purple instead of black, because I think black will be a little bit too harsh now that my colors have gone down a couple shades.
Yeah, and I think the eggplant will be really pretty. I like that particular fabric.
Hopefully, and then my dust skirt's eggplant too, so that should help balance that out a little bit, because there's 3 skirts involved, because I need a dust skirt that I can remove and wash, because otherwise she's going to get super dirty.
Yep.
See, all this planning that just goes into how you're going to put a costume together, it's like 10 times worse when there's also a skit involved, which of course there's a skit involved with Hinoto. So I'm also needing to take into consideration, am I going to be able to move? Will I be able to find my hands in these sleeves that go past my arms? How am I going to work around this issue?
Problem solving at its finest.
Problem solving.
Who said cosplay doesn't give you job skills?
Definitely gives you job skills. It definitely gives you problem solving skills. And one of those big builders of problem solving skills are what we're going to discuss today.
Yes.
Because we are going to talk about how to put together a quality skit or performance.
Good deal.
But mostly skits today. So primarily what we will be discussing today are going to be theatrical style performances, be that either like sung Broadway or scripted. There are a lot of different kinds of cosplay performances now, which is why skit doesn't really cover the category anymore. Performance is much more accurate, since you now will have dancers and singers and stage performers and acrobats and all sorts of different kinds of performers will do a performance at a cosplay competition. But today we're going to talk more about what you would see in a more traditional cosplay performance competition, so something like a WCS or an international. We are going to talk a little bit about what you need to keep in mind when looking at a performance for cosplay. And so some of the things you're going to keep in mind are translation to your audience, knowing your audience, length versus quality, use of your stage, and knowing your abilities as a performer. So we're going to kind of go through some of these different things. We're also going to talk a little bit about group versus solo, because that is a very drastically different thing in and of itself. But I would say the one thing that gets missed probably the most, and is probably the most important, is having a plot.
What? You mean I actually have to tell a story on stage?
So it is hard to tell a full story in 2.5 minutes. Some places only give you 90 seconds.
Whatever. Some places I've seen as low as 60.
Yeah, but you're still expected to have a beginning, middle, and end to your story.
What?
No.
Weird.
So the first thing you need to make sure of in your skit is that you actually have a plot that's going to translate to your audience.
So you mean I should put like a lot of in-jokes and, stuff that anybody that's watched it is totally going to be like, yeah.
So that is probably when we judge one of the biggest mistakes that we've seen cosplayers make, is that they're assuming that everyone knows their source material. And then they will typically develop a performance that's very dependent upon that knowledge. And even if that source material is super popular, your judges may or may not know it, or they may dock you even though they do know it because you didn't do enough setup, which has happened to us before.
Yeah, so the important thing to remember, and this goes for any storytelling situation, but especially for cosplay skits, it needs to be enjoyable. Like, regardless of whether or not you know where the characters or what universe they're in, it needs to be enjoyable for everybody, because you're putting on a show for the entire audience, not just fans of your specific series. And just because somebody is a fan of your specific series doesn't mean that they're going to know every little every little nook and cranny of the fandom, where they're going to automatically be able to take what you're giving them and relate it in the way that you want them to. So you need to make sure that it's very translatable whether or not you're using these specific characters or not.
If your skit is going to take some extensive setup, or you're finding that your skit is requiring a very long MC intro, you may want to reconsider your choice, as those are typically two very good indications that your skit is not going to translate to your general audience. Because if you have to do a lot of context setup, you're going to end up falling flat, even if your performance is very good, because the audience is not going to understand what's happening.
One of the ways that you can kind of also do a double check on this is have somebody who hasn't seen or read your material look at your script and then tell you what it's about. Like, you'll see people do like, tell me the TLDR version of, your favorite movie. So you're supposed to like summarize the movie plot in like one sentence, but do it very badly. It's kind of along those same lines. So like, we did one with very minimal setup where we're like, girl meets boy, girl wants boy to be her prince. And then he shows up and everybody's pretty much caught up. Like, that was all the setup that we needed. Like, nobody needs to know how the characters met. Nobody needs to know, like, what their relationship was like when they were kids. We're going to start from right here and move forward.
I do get that it's hard sometimes not to include that information, because as a fan, you want to, like, share all these reasons you're passionate about these characters. But you only have 2.5 minutes. An entire anime season has like 28 episodes. So you have to be reasonable with yourself and know that you're not going to be able to smash all that context into a 2.5 minute performance. What you do want to look at is, on the surface, what knowledge do they need to know? Like, Prince, Princess, I love the end.
The end.
Our international skit is a really good example. There was no way we were going to be able to give remotely the depth of context for Magi. Magi is a pretty complex show when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it. But visually alone, it's very obvious. Judar bad, Kogyoku good.
He looks evil and manipulating. She looks sweet and innocent.
Like,
there's
the
plot.
characters visually themselves set up our entire dynamic for us. We didn't really need to do a ton of explaining that he is this evil, conniving magician and she is this sweet, innocent princess. Now, we're going to do a little bit more setup in our new skit because we have a little bit more time. But the general concept of this one evil, this one good, nobody had an issue figuring that out.
Well, and if you want to put some of those little, like, ins for people that are hardcore fans, it's fine if you want to include them for whatever reason, but don't make it at the detriment of your general audience. It still needs to be enjoyable and understandable for your general audience, even if you kind of go above and beyond with a couple little things for those other people.
Yeah, it's fun to add little quips and things, and we tend to use more pop culture inside jokes, like an extra hour in the ball pit. That kind of
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Don't let your dreams be dreams. That translate to a larger audience, but, you know, not everybody may get that. And that's fine. Sword Art Online's probably a good one. One of the pop-ups makes fun of the, like, Nigerian prince emails, but we used Sinbad as the image for the Nigerian prince. Well, obviously not everyone's going to have seen Magi and know, but the people who had thought it was absolutely hysterical. But it still translated to the people that didn't know because he was obviously this fancy, it was a picture of this fancy prince. So they knew what we were getting at, even if you didn't get the Magi tag that we put into the joke. But I do find that that is typically your biggest blunder. Performance you're trying to do requires too much explanation or has too many inside jokes. Especially avoid inside jokes that are only part of your friend circle. I see this with a lot of younger performers who think they're absolutely hysterical because they're using a bunch of inside jokes between their friends. But that's definitely not going to translate to an audience. I've seen this the most with, like, Hetalia performances, honestly. And I get it, you're having fun up there, but your performance probably isn't going to translate. So, like, if you're doing it just for, like, your own kicks, like, go for it. If you're trying to win an award, you're probably not going to get there if you're just using inside jokes that are between you and your friends. So it just depends on why you're up there.
I would absolutely tell you, like, even if you are doing a masquerade not for awards but for friendship, which we preach a lot, it is still a show. And I think you're doing a disservice both to yourself and the audience if you don't at least try to make it a little bit enjoyable for them as well. So you do need to be mindful of that, even if you do go ahead and throw those digs in.
Well, that's kind of part of knowing your audience, too. Because some performances will do better at certain conventions than others as well. There are some cons where dramatic performances do really well, and then you could take it to another convention and they do pretty horribly because that convention likes to see comedy. So being aware of what typically is allowed and done at certain conventions will also benefit you when you're planning your performance. I would say World Cosplay Summit's probably one of our best examples for this. World Cosplay Summit has a very distinct style of skit that is typically used that will translate well for that particular competition because it needs to translate globally. So you will typically see skits with very little dialogue. You will typically see skits that are performed to some sort of soundtrack. There is a lot of choreography going around because there's not a lot of verbalization happening. And they're almost always fighting skits, but that's beside the point. But you're not likely to see, like, a Broadway-style musical skit at WCS.
Right. Because it wouldn't translate well to that type of audience.
But then you look at something like the International Cosplay League, and you do see that quite a bit. It just kind of depends on your audience and the type of competition. I find that at most conventions, at least in the Midwest, it's really hard to get drama through on a standard cosplay competition stage.
Yes.
Well, and that is partly because drama is harder to do. It's also harder to do without the context
exposition
of the series. Yes, because you're asking in 2.5 minutes for your audience to feel for you.
Yes, emotional attachment.
And they have no background with this character. They have no understanding of your situation. And you are trying to get them to feel for you in 2.5 minutes. And it's a very difficult concept. Comedy has its own tough points because being actually humorous and being funny can be two different things. If you go for the slapstick versus the more highbrow comedy, there's different elements of that. And then you've got your kind of hybrid comedy dramatic type of performances as well, which are typically more like your Broadway performances. The reason a lot of cosplayers will do performances to music or to songs is music helps get the feeling across very well. It enhances how you want your audience to feel.
Yeah, even if your soundtrack doesn't actually have any vocalization to it, there's no lyrics, the background music still sets a mood. Just like if you're watching a horror flick, like their soundtracks that they have are very distinctive versus if you were watching like a romantic comedy type of movie, like for what's going on in the background, and it helps set the mood and triggers emotion without you actually having to do anything extra just from listening to those particular sounds.
Can really help you when trying to translate certain things to your audience, whether you're doing drama or comedy. I do find it almost more necessary for drama because you have that lack of time for that exposition.
Yeah, we're talking about skit preferences. I can think of at least one con that we've been to where almost all of their fan choice awards go to either direct translation of musical numbers or parodies of musical numbers from like family-friendly movies.
Well, everybody loves a musical number. They're also the most fun to perform, too.
They can be super catchy and then get stuck in your head forever.
Exactly. I mean, you can't not love yourself a musical number. That's why we do so many of them.
Yep, because we love them.
I mean, we have a straight skit or two we're trying to get together, but even then we're going to put music behind it. I mean, it's going to happen because we need to set the mood.
Gotta set the mood.
We can't expect anyone to understand Ninja Shadow without some sort of mood setting.
Yeah, that music is definitely mood setting.
Let's make a serious skit about an Otome game.
Please.
It can be done, friends.
That's the goal.
Maybe you'll see it in 2022 at this point.
Serious skit about an Otome game. Yeah, because it's probably not going to happen before we go to Spain.
No.
So.
Well, and we don't expect anyone to know what Ninja Shadow is. Like, we're
goodness,
going
no.
in assuming our entire audience is completely blind to what this game is.
It's going to be a little bit of setup and then lots of dramatic music.
So if you approach a lot of your material that way, that can actually end up helping you out in being able to translate it to your audience. Because in the end, you want your performance to be quality. That can be hit or miss depending on your limitations with said performances, particularly the time limitations. A lot of people will think 2.5 minutes is not enough. It is enough.
And just because they give you 2.5 minutes does not mean that you have to use all 2.5 minutes.
Unless stated otherwise. So do check, though.
Yes.
Because we did get docked once for that.
I've seen some skits where like they went the entire length of time, but it would have been just like chef's kiss perfect if they would have stopped after 30 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
Because they got their point across. Like the plot happened, and then the rest of it, it's like this is just going on, and they're just doing the same thing over again. And no, stop. Why?
Yeah, if the convention does not require you to use all of your time, then focus on what length is going to give you the best overall performance, because sometimes filler is not a good thing.
Well, what is necessary for you to tell your plot that you developed in step 1?
Well, and this is particularly important if you're rolling solo, which we'll talk about later, because solo is a whole nother ball game of keeping your audience's attention, because it's really hard. But just try to consider, how much time do I really need for my performance? Do I really need to ask for that 30-second extension? Because the likelihood is you probably don't if you already have 2.5 minutes.
you can probably trim it down. You don't have to use the whole song or the whole scene or what have you.
Use of what you have is probably one of the biggest things in performance. That does include your stage. Knowing how to use your stage is important. It is unfortunate that most conventions cannot tell you how big their stage is before you get there.
Even if you ask, and they've been running at the same convention hall for years.
So you can work with anything from like the 4x4 box that Fusion used to have to the massive stage that Colossal Con used to have to the extremely massive stage that the International Cosplay League has. Knowing your stage size roughly is going to be absolutely necessary for how you block your skit. The best way you can do that is to try to find a recording of the competition from the year before. And then see if you can find out if it's going to be the same stage.
Well, and if you can't find a recording of either a single skit or the entire performance, try to find somebody that was there and ask them. They might be able to relate it to you in terms of like how long it took them to go across the stage. If they were doing a walk-on, they might be able to tell you how far they had to stand apart from each other to feel like they were filling it. They might be able to compare it to other stages in your geographic region that they have been on that maybe you have also seen, so you can get a general idea.
Well, and 9 times out of 10, if you can't find video, you're probably going to find some photos too. And that should give you a rough estimate of size versus person and what will fit on that stage. You also definitely need to find out if it's a standard stage or a thrust stage, because that is going to make a huge difference. So a thrust stage has what most people would consider a catwalk. Some conventions and competitions will require that you use that catwalk in your skit. I believe NakaCon does require that you use it. I think so does St. Louis.
I also believe that NDK has a catwalk that I don't know if it's a requirement, but I know that they all expect you to use it as proper use of the stage.
International Cosplay League expects us to use their catwalk during our performance.
Yay.
Mm-hmm. Guess what? We have to completely reblock. Oh, well, we're going to do that anyway.
We were going to do that anyway.
You know, they talk a lot about using the entire stage, but what you don't want to do is look like you're just running back and forth across the stage. You want to move with purpose. Actors only move when there is a legitimate reason to move.
Yeah, you don't just pace for no reason. Like, unless the whole point is that your character is pacing.
Right.
But even then, nobody paces back and forth the entire length of a room. So you're not going to be pacing, even if your character's doing it the entire length of the stage.
Like, it is okay to be still on stage. Just because you are still does not mean that you aren't commanding your stage. But you have to figure out how to best use your body or your costume to command your space. And when we talk a little bit about solo, we're going to talk about the difficulties in commanding your space when you're by yourself on stage. Obviously, this is easier to do the more people you have on stage to fill the space.
Yes.
However, then your blocking becomes significantly more complicated because you don't want to block your fellow actors while you are on stage.
What?
And we see this all the time. You see it constantly where like people will turn their backs to the audience or they will stand like perpendicular to each other, like face to face, and you can't see what they're doing. People will be like behind other people and the picture does not look great. And it's not using the stage in the best manner.
There are exceptions to that where sometimes it is appropriate, but 9 times out of 10, people do it on accident or they're not thinking about it. If there is a purposeful reason for you to turn your back to the audience because that's essentially what you're doing, then go for it. But the perpendicular thing where you're standing like at a 90-degree angle from the audience, there's almost never a good reason for that.
The only reason I can think of ever doing that is if you're in like Hamilton and you're doing like a duel or something where you're doing a duel and you're doing the face off and then you're going to about face and walk away from each other. That type of a situation. But yeah, you need to cheat out, which cheat out just means you're kind of making like a 45-degree angle from your stage partner. So you guys kind of make a triangle almost. So you're going to stand straight out and then pivot away from your partner. So you can still look like you're speaking to them, but you're not face to face with them. And we'll post some photo examples of this as well. This is a pretty common thing in acting, which when we do, whenever it happens and we do this actually live, we'll workshop all of this stuff with you guys someday at a con when we can do this live. Because this was intended to be like a live panel, but, you know, COVID. Understanding that use of stage and being aware of your stage mates and knowing what a good picture can look like can be very difficult. And the best way to do this is to record yourself during rehearsals. If you're recording yourselves during rehearsals, you're going to see what your picture looks like and what needs to be changed.
Yeah. So, I mean, you don't have to do anything fancy. You can do a cell phone recording.
Oh, yeah. We used my old iPad.
And we would just set it on like a stool or a chair outside and prop it up with like a book or a box and hit record and then go through the whole thing and then watch it and then make changes and do it again.
Because that is the downside to self-directing, is you don't have that person standing there being able to tell you what isn't looking right about your picture. So you're going to have to record it so that you can direct yourselves. But then you're going to know, how does this look? Is it good? Does it make sense? Am I running into my co-performer? Am I blocking my friends? Because that happens so much. Because a lot of times it'll be like completely by accident. Everyone forgets to rehearse in their costumes. Everyone. Yep. Everybody does. And you don't realize until you're in costume that now this setup, your massive costume is blocking another person on stage. Or your giant prop has completely blocked them.
Or you move a little bit slower than you were during rehearsal because now you have this costume or these shoes or what have you.
Right. Your massive skirt is now taking up twice the amount of room that you did. So now this picture doesn't work anymore. I know it's asking a lot. Try to do a rehearsal in at least part of your costumes because you're not going to know what's going to fit, especially if you have a big costume. Like, I have to be very considerate of how much I'm going to be able to move in Hinoto, because guess what? It's not much. It's a lot of dress. Depending on what stage I'm on, it may not be a very big stage. So I have to take into consideration, how am I going to command the stage? I'm probably not going to be able to do use of stage and command of stage by moving my physical whole person.
Right.
So I'm looking at adding fans into my performance to help with extension of self to help fill the stage more. Because I am physically not going to be able to walk back and forth due to the amount of costume I will have on my person. So you just have to keep in mind, what is your overall picture? Does our stage feel like it's commanded? Does it feel like it's full? Or does something seem like it's missing? And you're only going to know that if you practice in costume and you do a recording. Kind of goes with your quality of performance. So a lot of people will worry after a competition that maybe their performance wasn't good because the audience didn't have a big reaction to it. Audience reaction does not equal quality of performance.
No.
Like, not even close. You're typically, depending on the convention that you're at, is going to depend on what your audience reaction is. Your audience has a tendency to respond more to like their favorite song or some slapstick rather than a very well-crafted, moving, dramatic performance.
Yeah, or you could just be playing one of their favorite characters or somebody they've never heard of.
Or this thing is really, really big and therefore gets the most cheers because it's really, really big. That does happen a lot. If you have quality judges that have knowledge of performance, they are going to know the difference between audience reaction and quality of performance. It is unfortunate that I would say more so in performance than crafting, cons tend to have judges that aren't qualified to judge performance. I understand that in a lot of cases, it can be really obvious as to who probably had the best performance at a convention, since you don't have 100 people in performance, you might have like 10. But it can be a disservice when you have unqualified judges for performance because they are likely to go with audience reaction, which may not be the highest quality performance.
Yeah, if you're talking about technique.
Yes. If we're looking at technique and use of stage and storytelling and all of those areas that go into judging performance. If you're just looking at, the audience thought that was funny, I'm going to give them the best award. It's not the same. Like, I'm not going to go on my performance competition soapbox, but I feel like the requirements should be the same. And if you're looking at crafters for technique, use of materials, quality, fit, finishing, performance should also be looked at for those similar areas and not just how the audience reacted to the performance. But that also does require conventions to sometimes get multiple judges, which also runs into budget constraints, and so we do kind of get it.
It happens. We get it.
But part of this and putting a skit together is knowing what you have as far as strengths and abilities and your friends' strengths and abilities. Like, the big one is typically if you can't actually sing, don't have somebody else do it. Use the actual song. We've seen this quite a few times. You know, you think you're going to get extra points because you did the vocals yourself, but then it ends up hurting the overall quality of the performance. So, like, think about that. You know, are you comfortable doing drama? If you're not, don't do a drama skit yet.
Yeah, your discomfort will show on stage.
Yeah, if you're more drawn to comedy, do that. You know, if you're a dancer, do a dance performance. Try to think what plays within your strengths as a person and as a performer. And the only person that's going to know that is you. And you may not know what your strengths are yet, and that's okay. You can play with a lot of different options and opportunities. TikTok's a great way to do that. If you're wanting to play with different characters and different performance styles, you know, they've got a bunch of audio already uploaded. And you can just pick some things and play around. And you may find that, oh, this style I really gravitate toward. I should develop a skit around it. Everybody's going to try things and they're not going to work. And that's okay.
Yeah, you're not going to be perfect at everything. I mean, it's the same way with crafting. Like, not everybody can be an expert in every crafting field. Not everybody is going to be an expert in every performance field. But
the best place to start is start with what you know you're strong in and then start to branch out into things that you aren't as strong in.
Or I really need to practice this, so I'm going to start practicing it.
Like, we picked a very Broadway style evil versus good musical performance because we know that is a strength of ours for internationals. But then we have some other skits we're working on that we know we're a little bit more weak in to help us stretch our acting muscles a little bit. You know, start with your strengths and then start to branch out after you have tried out a few different things.
Baby steps.
We're going to talk a little bit about groups versus solo. Group performances are obviously going to be the most common because being by yourself on stage kind of sucks.
Yep.
Having done it a couple times, both as a theater actor and now as a cosplayer, it kind of sucks. It's 10 times harder than when you have somebody on stage with you because you have nobody to play off of. You don't have that other person's energy to, like, keep you going. Like, you're all reliant upon your own energy and the energy of the audience. And if the audience isn't giving you anything, it is tough. So kind of what we've talked about with our abilities, you know the abilities of you and your group, what your strengths and weaknesses are.
You're doing a disservice to your friends if you don't give them constructive criticism if they suck at something.
Yes. Talk to each other. Let each other
Communicate.
know. That also means that you need to actually rehearse your skit.
Yes.
I hate to tell you this.
Sometimes when we're rehearsing, we will rehearse together and then we will rehearse one at a time, which is really weird to do. I will totally say it, but it's no different than if you did it by yourself and you're practicing alone. It's just that the other person is watching you. Without somebody visibly seeing what's going on with what you're doing, they can't make proper recommendations for you. maybe you need to change the timing on this, or maybe you need to move a little bit faster here, or you're stuck on what you want to do here, so let's try this and see how it goes. Having another person, especially if it's the person you're going to be on stage with, who is going to affect the overall quality of your joint performance, is really beneficial.
We've also swapped roles on occasion to try to figure out what wasn't working in a scene.
Yes.
Which is also just fun to do.
It's just fun, and it breaks the tension.
It does, especially if you've been really frustrated about a scene and you're just not sure why it's not working. It can be really good exercise to just swap and see, why is this section of the skit not doing what I want it to do? And then sometimes the other person will realize, oh, well, it's because of this that it's not working. Or if you recorded it, you may look back and go, oh, I like what you did there. I think that solved the problem, so I'm going to do that now. Because performances are very much a collaborative activity. And if you haven't listened to our group episode, you should go back and listen to that, because there's also a bunch of handy tips in there on working with a group, because they are 10 times more important when you're performing with each other.
Details.
Because if you cannot communicate with each other, you're going to have a problem. So our solo pals, bless you all, solo performances are extremely difficult to do. I hadn't done, outside of some monologues during some shows, all that much until Harley. And yeah, that's tough. That's a lot of stage. And I'm one small person.
So much stage.
How do I fill all this stage? Solo performances heavily rely on the talent of the actor and the actor's ability to command a stage, more so than a group performance. Because you are up there by yourself and all eyes are on you.
No pressure.
You can't lean on anybody. You can't lean on your group member when something goes wrong. You can't rely on your group member to fix XYZ or fill this part of the stage or whatever, because you are by yourself. Solo is like another level of performing as far as difficulty is concerned. Because if you don't have it and you don't have some natural stage presence, it is going to be very difficult. Sometimes your costume can give you stage presence, depending on what you're wearing. If you've got some big, impressive costume, it can give you a lot of stage presence, but you also don't want your costume to overshadow what you're doing on stage either.
Right. And you don't want to rely on just the costume. Right. Because for some people, it'll be very drawing, but some people, it won't, or they'll get bored with it quick.
Yes. It's also a lot harder to just find a performance to do when you're by yourself. Solo scenes aren't as interesting as a scene between two or more people.
Yes.
So a lot of times that's why you'll see a lot of songs done, because again, songs help convey a sense of emotion and a sense of place and time. And so that can really help the soloist get their point across.
Well, and a lot of songs have the plot built in.
Yes. So your plot's already done for you. It's beautiful. It's done. Haha, ta-da!
Yeah.
Plot!
Still clip it. You don't need to use the whole thing.
It can be far more difficult to fill a long time requirement when you are a solo. So
don't, if you don't have to.
Right. If you don't need to do 2.5 minutes, I wouldn't, because there's a good chance people are going to get bored with what you're doing while you're up there by yourself.
You might get bored with what you're doing by yourself.
Because some of the other tricks of soloists are to either have a second person on the recording, so you're like talking to someone that's not physically there, which can or cannot work. It is harder to pull off than it sounds, so you do need to be very selective with that idea. A lot of people will use a set to help with both filling the stage and giving them something to interact with. So interactive sets can be extremely useful in a solo setting, but you also want to make sure that your set isn't so overwhelming that you get lost on the stage.
Yeah, just like your costume. You don't want it to be too distracting to where it overshadows you and what you're doing.
Another thing to take into consideration, and I haven't seen a lot of these done, but I have seen one or two, is people trying to do your more standard straight theatrical monologue. This is extremely hard to do.
Well, and frankly, most people that aren't into theater don't like them.
No, they're not interesting to watch. They're very difficult to perform. It's hard to get across what you're doing. So unless you are relatively well-versed in acting, I don't recommend attempting to do a monologue. They're very difficult, especially if you are crafting your own monologue based on the source material of your characters. So unless it's a monologue straight from like a movie or something that the character is in, it's going to be even 10 times harder for you to develop that script material. If you're doing Jack Sparrow and you're pulling a Jack Sparrow monologue from Pirates of the Caribbean, like that might work. But if you're wanting to do Sailor Moon and do a monologue, it's going to take a bit of finesse. You might look at adapting something, kind of like we did for our Sailor Moon villain skit, where the monologues from the Cell Block Tango were adapted to fit the villains. That could work for you, but it's just something you need to consider if you're writing your own monologue in particular, how difficult that may be to translate to your audience. I don't see it a lot, honestly. Most solos I see are either performances to songs or dance solos, which we're not going to talk about dance solos in this episode. We will talk about that in another performance episode where we talk about do's and don'ts of cosplay performances.
You get 3 guesses on which one that falls under, and the first 2 don't count.
Depends on how you do it. So if you are going to do a solo, keep it short, keep it simple. And highly recommended doing one that either is to music or to a song. So I've seen some good solos where like the character doesn't really speak much at all, but it's to music and it's a lot of miming and things like that. And that can be kind of fun too. But keep it simple, keep it easy to understand because they are quite tough to do. And when you are considering sets, there are a couple things that you should think of. I know we talked about keeping them purposeful and making sure they serve the story, but you also need to make sure that your competition allows them, because some don't.
Do they have stagehands that can help you with it? Are you allowed to bring your own? Do you have anybody that would be able or willing to assist you?
So yeah, you need to keep all of that into consideration if you're going to have a set. If there's no one to help you, are you going to be able to get that set up by yourself? Like, I know for Hinoto that I will need to talk somebody into coming with me because there's no way I can move anything in that dress. I can't. It's not possible. I have to talk somebody into coming and being my handler because I can't put my set on stage. Even if it's just our rolling rack, which is our favorite thing to use for a set. It's just one of those regular rolling clothing racks, and we love to put drops on top of it and roll it out onto the stage. It's a great game.
It's convenient.
It's very convenient, and it has worked well for us because it's not that big. It's about 6 by 6 at the most. I think it's more like 6 by 5.5 tall, I think.
Probably.
At its most.
Approximately.
Which is typically about as big as you need for a lot of these stages to give you something to interact with in the background. But definitely check, because sometimes they will not let you bring a backdrop.
Sometimes they don't give you extra time for setup and teardown, which means that you have to include your setup and teardown time in your 2.5 minutes or whatever your time limit might have to be.
So as we usually say, ask the
read
contest
the rules.
coordinator and read the rules.
Read the rules.
One of those two will be able to answer your questions regarding any type of set situations. And we'll do an episode more talking about sets in general and different types and different uses. We've used sets since like 2015, and we don't really know how to perform without them anymore. They're just a nice little cherry on top for your performance.
Enhancements. As long as your set, well, it's like anything else. Like, if your music goes, it can enhance. If it's poor, it can detract. If your set is good, it can enhance your performance. If it's poor, it can detract from your performance. Be purposeful in what you're doing.
Yes, in general, you should be purposeful in what you are doing. That should definitely be one of the things that you take away from this today is do things with a purpose. Try to keep it simple. Stay away from anything too dependent on your subject matter. Know that audience, and definitely rehearse so you can best use your stage and figure out your blocking. And of course, have fun while doing all of it.
You mean I have to have fun while I'm performing?
I can tell you as a judge, we can totally tell when you are not having fun.
Yes, that includes your friends that you made do this with you.
Yes, we can tell when you all are not having fun. So make sure in the end that when it's all said and done, you're still having a good time and that it's not all full of stress and terrible things.
Yes, because if it's all full of stress and terrible things, it's not worth doing.
But we love performing because it's just that little bit of extra that fills our theater bug that we need. And we do on occasion offer to assist others with looking at performances that they have planned. We do take on a number of those every year. So if you're ever interested, shoot us a message and we'll see if we have an opening.
We usually will post something on Instagram, our Vie Cosplay Instagram, towards the beginning of the calendar year or the con season, whenever we're going to start talking to people about that.
Yeah, we usually start taking people on around like January in preparation for convention season. And there's some different rules and stipulations and things that go about it, like don't message us a week before and expect us to be, be able to, you know.
Yeah, we cannot assist you with a competition that we're helping with in any way.
Oh, that too. Yeah, we definitely cannot help you if it's for a competition that we are judging for or working for. We are more than happy to take on people for our mentorships, but we do need some advanced notice prior to the convention that you're planning on doing. Because if you message us a week before your con and want us to help walk you through a performance, we're probably not going to be able to do that. So it's all about planning ahead so that you can have the best possible performance.
Well, and frankly, any of the creative criticism that we're going to be able to give you, you might not have time to incorporate during that shorter period of time anyway.
Which is why we typically open it up in January, because con season doesn't typically fully hit till almost May for a lot of areas as far as the larger competitions are concerned. So we try to start it then. If you give us enough time, we're more than happy to help mentor you through, providing we are not working for the convention you are going to, which I don't think will be a problem in 2021.
What
so
are
unless
cons?
You're planning on going to like FunkCon, which doesn't do performances, or Anime Iowa, we should be good. Although we still don't have a contract, but that's beside the point.
Do you want to sign a contract?
Someday.
Yeah.
Someday.
All right, guys, it's been fun. We're going to get out of here. I'm Ash.
I'm Elle.
We are Vie Cosplay.
And this is Shit Cosplayers Say.
You've been listening to Shit Cosplayers Say, an LVC production. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Podcast SCS. Our website is lavicosplay.com. Have a fun, crazy con or cosplay-related story, absurd cosplay question, or just something in general to share with us? Email us at podcastscs@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should.